Sorry about that. Sorry, yes, that time the dimming of the lights was a false alarm because we were actually talking about what will happen with the video if you dim the lights. But not to worry. So we'll keep them on. Right, well, thank you for staying the course so far. And I'm absolutely delighted to announce our second and final keynote speaker for today, and that's Jessica Ringrose from the Institute of Education at the University of London. And Jessica's definitely one of the people who is really pushing and working with Deleuze and feminist post-structural theories in application to a number of really interesting research projects, and she's probably going to be talking about that today. And as she says in her abstract, theoretically and methodologically, her work is in the area of feminism, post-structuralism, and Deleuze-Guattarian approaches. And yes, that is a word. Okay? I think you know what it means. I won't take it much longer introducing because I don't want us to be eating into Jessica's time. So just to say, Jessica's going to be talking on schizofeminism, Deleuze-Guattarian mapping methodologies for qualitative educational research, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome her. Thanks, Jessica.
Great. Hi, can everyone hear me? Is that good? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Maggie. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today, and thank you for inviting me. It's a tough order to follow Betty St. Pierre. I already freaked Betty out when I first met her earlier this year by telling her that her green book, Working the Runes, was my Bible in graduate school, to which, where is Betty? Yes, to which she looked horrified that anything had become canonical and biblical with her name on it, but it's true. Yeah, I'm just really thrilled to be here today. Disclaimers, there's always the disclaimers to the talk. I sort of feel like this talk is a bunch of musings and a bunch of worries, but the discussion that we just had in our group sort of confirmed that that's okay for me to be worried and anxious in my talk about the state of qualitative research and theory. So I'll just crack on, and I do have a script which I'm going to have to try and stick to so that I make it through, otherwise I'll waffle off and we'll never finish. So the paper is a work in progress with looking at some research that I've been doing over a number of years with Emma Reynolds from Cardiff University, who can't be here with us today. It's looking at, I'm going to look particularly at some research that we've been doing with a girl power group in a Welsh secondary school that was organized to raise the achievement of girls who were disengaged from formal schooling. Some of the paper is co-written, and some of it is, like I was just saying, a personal reflection on some of the things troubling me about qualitative research and theory. So there's 4 parts of the paper that I'm going to try to bring together. First, I'm going to explore my research engagement with a UK-wide program based on preventing gender violence at school. I'm going to raise a series of critical questions discussing my sense of academic identity crisis, as I've called it, around what we should be doing with our qualitative research in the current academic climate, something we started to talk about in the first keynote and also the workshop we've just done. Here I'm mostly worrying about how to do and be a good enough qualitative feminist researcher. Second, I'm going to explore some theoretical attachments and a framework for thinking about what we call here schizofeminism, but I'm also going to look at the concept of assemblage, and I've called it schizofeminist activist pedagogical research assemblage. If you put a dash in everything, it just makes it much more post-structural. I'm going to discuss this schizoanalytic mapping approach, drawing on Deleuze and Guattari and feminist reworkings of their theories. Third, I'm going to explore what the framework has made possible, exploring some of our data with the Girl Power group. I tried to scribble out all my data references, but then I just thought, oh, screw it, I'm going to keep them in. Betty. So I'm going to look at the strugglings of the girls who are trying to become teen female feminist teachers, and look at how they get contradictorily positioned in school as sexperts. So that's media speak for a sex expert, and what Sarah Ahmed calls feminist killjoys, and how they negotiate these positionings in their teen feminist group. Finally, I'm going to try to bring all these parts together and talk about an idea of politicized schizo-feminist impact, to take the ref notion, but to try and Deleuzo-Guattarify impact. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to try and do. I hope some parts of something resonate with some of you. Okay, so I just want to basically tell you a little bit about doing the type of research that we've been doing. So the first part of this talk is a little bit descriptive. I want to set this journey of exploring girl power into context, and tell you a little bit more about this constantly evolving project that we've been involved with. So the project started as a result of a UK charity called Womankind. Many of you might have heard of them. They run an educational program in the UK called Challenging Violence, Changing Lives, and it delivered lesson plans in schools around addressing issues of gendered violence and sexual bullying. In what management speaks calls a cascade effect, the program worked to deliver lessons in various schools and train up teachers to deliver this curriculum across the UK. My engagement with this organization was quite lengthy. First of all, in 2007, I started working with them voluntarily, reading some of their reports. Then in 2009, they put out a large tender to evaluate some of the work they're doing in schools, and I actually went for tender on that, and I lost it to a competitor from my own institution. We actually didn't know that we were both bidding for it, and we showed up to the interview. It was a really horrible situation, and the other team got it, and it was really interesting because I went for tender with two feminist colleagues. One of them was a feminist woman of color, and they gave the tender to two men, so I was even more pissed off. But anyway, that was really horrible, but I think it's really important that we talk about these effective struggles. You know, it's not that easy to sometimes pursue the type of research engagements we want to do. So I continued on in contact with Womankind, and finally a couple years later in 2011, they made a strategic decision to abandon their UK educational program in schools because they wanted to focus on women and education in the developing context. I find this a hugely problematic move that relates to my long-standing critique of erroneous post-feminist beliefs that girls and boys are now equal in the global north and in the UK. But anyway, they commissioned a new consultancy to kind of make a final evaluation of their entire program over its years running. So my paid engagement with this organization, and that's the form of research practice that's valued in our current corporate educational climate, began when we were hired to undertake this evaluation. So I want to be really clear with you. It was £12,000. We were 3 academics, and we had to evaluate some of the impact they were making. We interviewed some of the key people. It's a very small amount of money. Under the kind of logic of the university, once we'd finished that evaluation, we would kind of stop working with them. But during the consultancy, I was particularly drawn to a very vibrant, inventive, and passionate teacher named Shiwan, who was working in a school in Cardiff. And she explained in our telephone interview how she had expanded and built upon the Womankind lesson plans and set up a girl power group in her school to engage these what were called disengaged girls. You can imagine, well, anybody that knows me will imagine that this was a real hot spot in the data for me, to use Maggie's fabulous term from our book, which we'll be discussing later today and also in a workshop on Thursday. This data really glowed for me in my memory of undertaking these interviews, particularly in light of some of the other interviews. So, for example, one of the interviews was, this woman deputy had telling me that they couldn't have sexual bullying curriculum in schools anymore. It was just a luxury that they could not afford in the context of failing schools. So a lot of that consultancy was really depressing. But anyway, during this period, I had a series of discussions with Emma, who's obviously at Cardiff, and we just decided we wanted to go visit this school. We wanted to meet this teacher. So we did it. I booked my ticket to Cardiff. It's not that expensive if you do the single journeys. And we went, and the visit was totally extraordinary. I've written about it for a special issue of Qualitative Inquiry put together by Betty and Alicia Jackson. Just the great it was the first visit actually that we document in that article, where we talk about entering into some discussions about the girls, about what they were learning about. We talked about the slut walks were happening at that time, and some of the girls were actually able to go on the slut walks, and then we wrote about that in another article in Gender and Education. Basically, we wanted to continue working with them after the first visit. So Emma put in another ethical review form to continue working with them so that we would have ethical approval, you know, whatever hatching, whatever it was we wanted to do. And we did. We continued working with them. And I'm going to talk more about the methods in a little bit. So what's my point in telling you this? It's not that you should all set out to find research, to find and research feminist girl power groups, although that would be really great. Rather, I'm reflecting on this as a way to think about what we're doing when we engage with the research machine at our universities, and what we think we're doing when we're going out into the world to undertake research. Both Em and I have had to work really, really very hard to continue to do this unfunded research project. Given our universities monitor our workflow, they aim to restrict us offering free labor. They appeal to arguments about institutional value, reputation, esteem. I actually call our research underground because I'm actually not supposed to do it, literally. But you know, Emma's university has up until this point been more flexible, so under the guise of her ethical committee, I can go and do it. And I just think it's really important to just get the basics out there. You know, these aren't all giant research-funded projects. They're different strategic things that we do as we move along in the world. Okay, so thinking about this, I just saw a recent talk by Michael Apple, and I wanted to talk about you know, his rejoinder to this corporate university that kind of sets all these constraints on what we can do and what should our research be. He starts almost every talk I've ever heard him deliver by suggesting that we need to become scribes. He calls it becoming a secretary to the groups around us to actually document social change and possibilities of political resistance in our educational context of neoliberal, performative, and audit culture. He says we have to bear witness to negativity. He argues that in doing so, this means broadening what counts as academic research. He says we have to get off our academic balconies, drawing on Bakhtin and looking down on the carnival. He says that we need to become some sort of public intellectual, although there's many methodologies for doing this. And we're supposed to intervene into the often right-wing media to bring some kind of critical voice into this. And we need to do all this whilst not committing academic suicide. So for me, this raises a lot of important questions that I'm going to orient this part of my talk on. Do we wait until we receive £250,000 to get out into our community and do research, or do we do it other ways, through our relationships, networks, and strategies? What are the conditions through which we can do research that looks different, given our personal conditions, our paid work contracts, our workload management strategies, and institutional pressures? What do we do with our findings? For whom are we speaking? Is it simply an academic audience? Do we engage with the media, for instance, and how? Do we write, gasp, a popular book? I'm actually really seriously considering the possibility of doing something like that. I don't know how to, but that's some kind of questions I'd like us to talk about further as we move on this week. I think the questions are really extremely important and relevant to feminists and to us at this conference debating the place of qualitative research, and to thinking about the types of qualitative research that are possible, and we've been talking about that already all day. I live much of my life actually in a ball of real confusion and academic identity crisis over how to be a good feminist researcher, theory maker, and income generator in my corporate audit culture university. There's an endless parade of rather paranoid questions. Should I be setting about to get more high esteem money from a research council instead of this low-level work? One of my colleagues actually laughed at me. I got a recent consultancy for £4,000, and she literally laughed because she was going for like £1 million of ERC money. And also, you know, what should I do with the findings that I get? Should I be, I'm thinking now of some research I did for the NSPCC on sexting. You know, there's a lot of pressure, just get the findings out, do the scientific, findings. You know, how do I do that? When will I actually find time to read literature on my substantive topics, let alone the theoretical feminism that might help me make sense of what's going on? Where does theoretically informed qualitative research then sit alongside the real theory makers? Because we're not even those in the institution. I'm thinking of like the philosophy or cultural studies people. We're in the I am in the intellectually impoverished quarter of education. So it's very contradictorily positioned in all of these things. So what's to be done about this messy, complicated, sometimes exhilarating, usually painful, sometimes impossible space of doing theoretically informed and politically informed qualitative research? And I'm quite nervous to talk about these challenges. You're probably thinking, oh my God, what a drag. But it's not really about the individual. It's rather how we work within our academic institutions and networks. And for me, this is what this conference is about. These problems are inexorably wrapped up in my ability to think or not about how we bring together the empirical and the theoretical. Who may be the audience for such encounters. Sometimes I do feel like these are distinct zones, and Alicia Jackson and Lisa Mazza have talked about this kind of, these strange, uncomfortable entanglements in their book, Thinking Theory with Qualitative Research. And I mean, this kind of discomfort must have propelled me to edit the book that I'm launching later, because I'm not sure why we did that, but it must have. So I'm continuing to grapple with these issues. Now I'm going to shift tack a little bit, and I'm going to try and talk about my own theoretical attachments. And these actually help me to sustain my life, to literally survive as a feminist researcher. That's why I'm invested, I believe, in these theoretical attachments. Okay, so this next section is called What Can Our Feminist Theory Do? Schizofeminism Assemblages. Deleuze and Guattari and their often strange ramblings about psychoanalysis and capitalism help me to gain some sort of perspective about what we as academics should be doing. In some sense, they legitimate and explain the mess, and are also explicit that mapping out the contents of this mess is essential. They argue that our ability to resist control or our submission has to be assessed at every level of every move. And they offer a mode of analysis called schizoanalysis to map what, and I'm going to use some of the language without like elaborating all of it, so bear with me. They say to map molecular ruptures, imperceptibility, lines of flight, becomings, and these, as we were discussing in our workshop that we just had, or our discussion group that we just had, these actually enable new ways of seeing what's out there in the world. As Rosie Braidotti and others have long suggested, Deleuze and Guattari's work can be appropriated by feminists because it involves challenging what they call Oedipal logics and bourgeois repression of sexuality. So my interest really began with Deleuze and Guattari and their concepts in how they help to analyze the Oedipal bindings and the capitalist territorializations, there's that word, Alicia, territorializations, which organize femininities. And I found this article, this chapter from, it's a book edited by Claire Colebrook actually called Deleuze and Gender, really, really useful. It's from a philosopher called Tasmin Lorraine, and she wrote a chapter called Feminist Lines of Flight. So she says, feminism could be seen as an untimely schizo practice designed to intervene with contemporary configurations of modern subjectivity that involve suppression and oppression of subjects that deviate from a majoritarian norm with the fault lines of sex, gender, and sexual identity as its starting point. Deleuze and Guattari recommend carefully mapping where we are, that's what I just said, in order to find vitalizing paths that extend the tendencies resisting binary designations. Feminism as a theoretical and pragmatic process can intuit ways of living our sex and gender that are more affirming of the continual range of variation in being sexed and gendered becoming human entails. So by mapping where we are and finding lines of flight from majoritarian subjectivity, can extend our capacities in ways that synchronize with other feminists, along with other forms of minoritarian and schizo becomings, and can promote a joyfully collective and open-ended process of becoming human. So that's kind of utopic, but anyway, I think it's kind of got some interesting ideas in there. Just to sort of sum up then, we have to find out where we are. We need to find lines of flight for the majoritarian or molar and normative subject positions. And schizoanalysis, which is the entire oeuvre, and I mean, Betty was saying, you can't just pick up a concept. You need to kind of like be grappling with the entire kind of onto epistemological shifts that are happening with the Deleuze-Guattarian toolkit, as I've heard people talk about the Foucauldian set of concepts. But I do think that schizoanalysis is quite a provocative response to capitalism and psychoanalysis and so on. Schizoanalysis works to center the schizo and the hyper-contradictory. Instead of pathologizing the schizoid, they insist that we should examine how capitalist culture is schizoid, characterized by chaotic multiplicities. And I'm quoting Anna Hickey Moody and Peta Malins have an excellent book called Deleuzian Encounters in 2006. Fabulous introduction, which explains a lot of concepts. So Deleuze and Guattari argue that the real question of schizoanalysis is figuring out this chaos. And there's just some of their basic questions. What drives your desiring machines? What's their functioning? What are the syntheses into which they enter and operate? That's from Anti-Oedipus. So if we take this now and we try to think about social scientists, whatever those are, if I characterize myself as one, I think it's about micro-mappings in time and space contexts and through multiple techniques of research collection and analysis. And something that's been driving our research is trying to find out when do desiring machines become paranoid and shut down the libido and creativity, and when are new connections and openings and possibilities enabled. So one other concept I wanted to get into to sort of try and think about like the research that I'm engaging in is assemblages. We argue that when we're doing our research, we are connecting or plugging into, also another fabulous concept from Alicia Jackson and Lisa Mazai, we're actually forming complex assemblages. And here's just a definition from, there's a really excellent article by a woman named Phantom on sex education assemblages. So I encourage you to read that. But, I mean, there are so many things that got lost in translation, but I think that this definition of assemblages is really useful. The French original agencement reminds us an assemblage is the active process of assembling, and in the case of the sex education assemblages, they're talking about bodies, and in some senses we are too. The entire assemblage changes the body constituting it. Power relations are immanent in assemblages, and assemblages are subject to open-ended and unpredictable processes of becoming. So I don't think that's that hard, really, to grasp that kind of notion of assemblage, and possibly it could be provocative for our thinking. So we've tried to think about this active process of joining and connecting bodies and things and energetic forces generated through the various connections happening as we plug in as researchers to this school and this group. Particularly important for us is how the concept of assemblage disrupts a linear cause and effect model of how agency, and in this case feminist agency, emerges. It points to the ways in which subjectivity emerges in and through moving and dynamic assemblages. Pushes us to reconceptualize an immanent feminist subjectivity that's always on the move and beyond the boundaries of the individual body, always already more and other than itself. Barad's idea of interaction is really useful here as well for unsettling a bounded notion of subjectivity. I know Halevi Lenz-Taguchi is going to be talking about Barad later this week, but once you get interaction in your brain, you can't get it out of there. It's just like, yeah, I really get that, you know, like things are changing one another through their interaction with one another. But anyway, I want to move on now to the third section of the paper, where I'm going to discuss a little bit of the interview data that we produced, we co-produced with these young teen girls. Obviously, me separating this out is an agential cutting up of the research process to borrow from Barad again. I'm imposing this since, as St. Pierre and Pillow ask in Working the Runes, when does research or data begin and end? But I'm going to outline a snapshot of some talk. And I think this, if you bear in mind, the whole research encounter is outside the rhythm of a massive paid grant. It's been organically constructed through our ongoing engagement with the teachers and the school and the young people. Okay, so over the past 3 years, we've done exploratory observations, focus group and individual interviews, ethnographic reflections upon their out-of-school activities, so going on the slut walk with them, hosting and organizing a Young Sexualities Conference, which brought academics, policymakers, and young people together. And at that event, the girls made their own film, which we actually haven't had a chance to analyze. It's really, really cool. They did they kind of did a subversive take on, how many of you in the UK know about this show called Snog, Marry, or Avoid? Yeah. So basically, it's like a makeover show where you want to like stop being a slut to become marriageable. And so they did like a reverse one. But the funny thing is all the girls wanted to be the slut. I don't even have time to get into that, but I'm going to talk about slut quite a lot as I move on, but I don't have time to talk about their video, which is really, really awesome. We just simply haven't had time to look at it yet. And we want to look at it with them as well later this year. Okay, so in this paper that we wrote for Elizabeth St. Pierre and Alicia Jackson, the paper was called Fuck Rape, Mapping Effective Intensities in a Feminist Research Assemblage. I always try to have very politically provocative titles because I think it's like revaluing of girl culture, and I just think it's actually really quite important to foreground the types of issues that they're grappling with. Anyway, in that paper, we explored some of the girls' experiences of going on the local slut walk and our experiences of analyzing the glowing parts of the data in those interviews as researchers. We found that the girls delighted in attacking ideas about slut-shaming and rape culture back within the highly regulated context of the school space where we were talking to them. Now, for any of you that might have read that article, this is a year later, this interview, where we're asking them to explicitly reflect upon being a part of this group for disengaged girls. Now, why were these girls disengaged? I did have a whole thing about this poll, but I'm not going to have a chance to get into it, but just have this picture in your mind. The girls were disengaged because of I'm going to stop for a second and tell you that basically the ATL and the NUT had a conference where they basically were highlighting all of these problems about girls becoming hypersexualized and all of these calls to intervene with girls. These girls were considered disengaged because of these familiar suspects that blocked the desired educational engagements. They were girls who were ostensibly too interested in their bodies, hair and fashion, and in their boyfriends and sex, practices which are seen to jeopardize their capacity to perform academically a successful girl. I think this notion of disengagement is actually really interesting. It evokes a kind of Deleuzian thinking about an inability to plug into the workings of the school and the series of specific machines that are orienting players towards particular goals. But the pedagogical initiative of the girl group was really trying to intervene into this sort of pernicious educational discourse of achievement and what a particular orientation of engagement may mean. The feminist teacher Shiwan, she used a discourse of emotional well-being to legitimize bringing this curriculum into the school. So what did the Girl Power group do? Prior to our interaction with them, they learned about women's rights. They learned about sexual relationship education, LGBT issues, and domestic violence. And they participated in local and national domestic violence and bullying conferences. So hold that in your mind, why are they doing that? I want you to think about that. It was actually their very engagement with these soft subjects, these non-academic and informal aspects of education, which some regard as non-relevant peer culture issues. I have my recent book, Post-Feminist Education, Girls and Sexual Politics of Schooling, is all about informal peer culture, and I've actually been told that it has nothing to do with education or schooling. So there are people in education who really firmly hold that belief, and we really need to challenge some of these binaries that are being drawn. But anyway, It was this engagement with these sort of non-relevant peer culture issues that did engender powerful material changes for them at school, for these girls at school and beyond. They were in positions of some pedagogical power to inform and deliver healthy relationships lessons to younger pupils. From the beginning, we were very interested in why there was this focus on sexual violence, and this actually stemmed from the Womankind curriculum, because they were focused on domestic violence, and the curriculum was all about sexual bullying. So we're very, very worried about the focus that sex negative sort of orientation might have, and I'm going to explore that as I move on. And we sort of saw a contradiction, actually the girls saw it as well, and a tension between them sort of taking on these curriculum and becoming sort of sex experts, and the fact that they still had to kind of navigate their relationships at school, which was quite difficult for them. And I'm going to talk about how they become labeled as feminist killjoys. So the next section now is called What Does the Girl Power Group Do? And I'm going to talk about our interview production with them. So the interview begins with girls discussing their fears about the girls group ending when they move into sixth form. It really makes me nervous to think that we're not doing stuff anymore. It gets me really scared because you feel like it's gonna fall apart or something. Maybe because everyone's leaving for different sixth forms as well. Yeah, we're not gonna be like us together. I know, and I'm a hard worker and everything, but I'm a bit naughty in school sometimes, and the fact that it's not there as much, it scares me. It keeps you focused. Yes, it gave me something to do, and I like doing it, and I like the responsibility. Now I'm sitting in detention all the time. Are you? Yeah, because there's nothing to do, so you need somewhere for your energy to go. Because I loved it so much. People don't understand. They think, oh, schoolwork. Okay, you like it, but I loved it. It's something I really cared about. So going makes me really scared to think about that. So the girls are discussing how much they loved the girls group, their fears in moving forward into sixth form without the group, and the tension around being passionately attached to something that is perceived as schoolwork is evident. But by doing something that they really loved and really cared about, it gave them a feeling of responsibility and a feeling of creating change. So they went on to say, I know a few boys, I know this sounds really weird, but their parents came up to them on the school parent night or whatever and said, yeah, you really made him think about that. Some people, some boys, find it really good what we're doing and what we do, but then other ones, they just laugh about it and they try to act like they don't really care and they think it's not cool at all. But even if they do act like that we're all nerdy doing this stuff, I really couldn't care less. I don't care. I don't have certain friends because of it, because our views are so different, especially about gender sort of things. That sounds like my adult experiences. Well, we're all known as pretty feisty, us lot, because we stand up for what we believe in. So this talk gets at some of the girls' feelings of status, empowerment, and a sense of agency. They talk about standing up for what they believed in, being feisty, having views that are different. It means they didn't have certain friends. But as they say, the Girl Power Group enabled them to not care less in order to do something that they really cared about. However, as these quotes are starting to illustrate, becoming known as what they said was a bit of a feminist, as girls who care and challenge, in their words, gender sorts of things, was not easy. It created quite a lot of difficulties. Loads of our friends are really cautious on words they use around us. People I don't know go I've heard about you, don't use slut in a negative context. People know, and things like that. Oh, you're a bit of a feminist, so people know before they meet us. And they say about a body, oh, she has a bangable body, but they wouldn't say it in front of you. They wouldn't say that. Well, us, because they know. And they wouldn't use certain words in front of us. Because we know all that stuff about domestic violence and all that. We know all that sort of science of learning about relationships. We can't trust people as much, maybe straight away. Oh, wait, hang on. This is the version of feminism that I've been quite worried about here. This sort of violence kind of feminism that's shaping the possibilities and energetic outcomes of their ability to kind of engage with their peer group. The womankind lessons focused on raising awareness about gender violence and sexual bullying, as I've been saying. The first time we actually met the girls, and we talk about this in our earlier paper, they shared one of the lessons with us, which featured Rihanna, who was all battered up, and she had escaped Chris Brown, and she was like a survivor. I don't know what they did since she went back to him, didn't she? Yeah. Anyway, we were just like, why is this all about violence, and where is your own sexual desire and energy? And that's how we started talking about the slut walks, and that's why they ended up going on it. The lesson plans covered slut as a bad word that creates bad feelings or affects for others, but it misses how slut works to shame and sexually regulate many of the objects upon which it fails and sticks. This discussion of slut as a bad name never offered insight into how sexual competition and regulation works. And we just found that this framework was really, really limiting. We felt from the beginning there was little possibility for a feminism that helped you feel empowered in your body, in the sense of the erotic power theorized by Audre Lorde. And I understand we're going to have a workshop on Audre Lorde. I'm really excited about that towards the end of the week. NIAC. Tomorrow, yes. Very exciting. Or this kind of energy, life force theorized by Deleuze and Guattari gets really shut down. So being known then as a bit of a feminist got the boys to back off and respect them, but they only got this respect from not being easy and not being slutty, they explained to us. So we said, well, when you say non-slutty, what do you mean? Like, I don't know, we respect ourselves. I was just thinking the boys back off a bit because they know we're not as easy to get as other people. Not as easy, but then boys like that. They like the fact that we're not easy. Like, they really like that. Most boys seem to respect it anyway. Yeah, but most of them are really, all for it. Most of them do think, because I know it sounds really bad, but with the whole slut thing, people are like, oh, it's quite a relief to have non-slutty girls. Some people are like, oh, cool, that's quite nice. Taking you through the minutiae of the data. So, how can we begin to think about how girls are gaining power from being non-slutty? They can be cool and respected, but only in a way that cuts them off from their material, sexual, feminine body. This is a familiar battleground between the feminine brain and body. The girls actually discussed, and I don't have time to get into it, but it's quite disturbing, and this is,